Thank you very much, Rabbi. And really, I appreciate having been involved in the Stanmore Academy. Thank you very much to Rabbi Fine for inviting me. I've really had a great time these last 4 weeks. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is the last of the series we're doing now. But I hope you're really going to enjoy the shir tonight. I just shared the source sheet on the group chat in case anyone wants to pick it up from there. Rabbi Fine also has, and I'll have it on WhatsApp too, so you can always pick it up afterwards or during. But the topic for today is the really fascinating issue of downloading music, internet theft, etc., etc. This is extremely practical. All of us, I dare say, on this chat, and all of our family are very often on the internet. We're very often downloading stuff. And it's not always 100% clear exactly whether we should be or whether we shouldn't be. And I must say that it's not always 100% clear in English law, even if that's the relevant law, which we'll talk about soon, what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And I want to talk a little bit about those issues today. There are lots of halachic issues that come up with the internet, many of which I'm not going to talk about at all. Things like, is one required to have an internet filter to try and keep out the undesirable content? Downloading, we are going to talk about confidentiality is an important thing. To what extent should we be having access to people's data? People have interesting questions about VPNs. I don't know if you're into VPNs, virtual private networks, but you can basically reroute your internet access through a VPN, so the internet provider, whoever it is, whether it's BBC or whoever, Netflix, thinks that you're actually somewhere that you're not. You can reroute your internet access through, I don't know, Rwanda, if that's something that will help you, and then Netflix thinks that you're tuning in from Rwanda. Now, I've no idea what Rwanda Netflix is like. I suspect it's a little on the limited side, but there again, maybe it's fantastic. Maybe you want to be in Rwanda. Can you fool Netflix into thinking that you're there when you're really sitting in Stanmore? That's one question, which we can talk about a little bit maybe later. There are all sorts of fascinating questions of using cameras through the internet to fulfill halachic requirements, to supervise kashrus, maybe milking animals, giving testimony. Can you answer brachas? Can you say amen to somebody who's having a wedding on the internet? I was tuned in last night to one of my students' weddings, zoomed in America. Am I allowed to respond to all the stuff that's going on there? Can you be part of a minyan on the internet? That's a fascinating question. Can you sell your chametz on the internet? There's so many things. Transactions on Shabbos. If I set in train a series of acquisitions and they happen on Shabbos, or things that there's all sorts of stuff to talk about. We're not going to talk about all of that. Sorry to leave you with a bit of a tease on a lot of those things. But we are going to talk about the basic issue of downloading and theft, because that's really, I think, the central issue that people want to talk about the internet. And the reason it's such a fascinating topic is that it sort of activates an area of halacha where we really never had to deal with this before. Meaning, if you'd have asked, I don't know, Moshe Rabbeinu or David HaMelech, is it okay to drive a car on Shabbos? No doubt they'd have said to you, well, I don't know what a car is, but tell me how it works and I'll tell you if it's okay. And you could just explain that a car is an internal combustion engine. You've got thousands of little explosions happening every minute. And very quickly you'll get to a conclusion that it's clearly not allowed on Shabbos. And there really isn't anything particularly controversial in that. It's very easy to answer. However, the internet is completely new. What is the status of a virtual reality? Yeah, we are all coming to each other now through virtual realities. They're real in terms of electronic impulses, but it's not the real me that's talking to you. It's a screen that's talking to you, or a computer. Those things are brand new. What is the status of that, and how do we relate to it? That's one of the exciting things about this, because we see how the halachic system sort of develops and catches up and brings on classic themes to answer modern day technological issues. Okay, so let's start with some basic sources. We're going to be quite fast and furious tonight. There's a lot that I'd like to do with you. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see it there as well. Do you see the shared screen there? Yes, you do? Excellent. Okay, so let's start talking about theft. First of all, we have to just revise a few of the basic sources. What is theft halachically? So the first thing you need to know is that the rabbis were very, very confident that most of us are stealing most of the time, which is not good, by the way. Have a look in source number 1. The Gemara in Bava Basra says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Roiv begezel. Most people are stealing. Miut ba'arayat, a minority of people are committing acts of sexual inappropriate nature. The hakol b'lashon hara, but everybody's speaking lashon hara. Okay, so the Gemara says, really, everybody's speaking lashon hara? All those holy people, the lashon hara. You think everybody's speaking lashon hara? Ella, no, avak lashon hara. Even if they're not speaking full-blown lashon hara, they're talking in a way which will cause lashon hara. But the point I'm making here is the roiv begezel. Most people are stealing. It's very hard to avoid, and we tend to justify it to ourselves because money is a big yetzer hara, and stealing is a part of our everyday lives, even before the internet. So we'll see what that means exactly. I'm sure it'll be well known to you that there are many different kinds of stealing. Let's start with the most obvious, which is actually the least relevant. The 10 Commandments. Number 2 says, Lo tignov, do not steal. Now, that actually has got nothing to do with stealing money. Chazal, the rabbis write from the context there. Rashi brings, B'gonev nefashot hakatuv medaber. We're talking about kidnapping. So I imagine that nobody here in Stanmore is involved in the kidnapping trade. Let's hope not. If you are, then you need to ask your rabbi a shaila because it's not okay. But money is dealt with somewhere else. Number 3, lo tignaivu, do not steal. That's to do with stealing money. But that's not the only reference to stealing. Look at number 4, things that we're not so familiar with. Lo ta'ashok etrieka, oshek. I don't know if anybody here has really even heard of oshek. Oshek is a type of theft where you deny money to people who that money is owed to, like repaying a loan or not paying a wage, something like that. Loi sigzol. Oh, here's another one. Gezela. I'm sure people are familiar with gezela, being a gazlan as opposed to a ganaf. Loi salim pu'ulot sacher itzchad boker. You may not keep the wages of a worker with you until the morning, and that's actually fascinating halachic area. You have to pay your workers on time. We had a nice fellow who came to do some plumbing at our house a few days ago. It was about 6:30 in the evening. He finished the job. He charges by the hour. And I said, I'd like to pay you. And he says, fine, pay. I said, no, but I need to pay you before Shkia. He said, really? I said, I don't have to if you don't mind, but I would prefer to pay you before the sun goes down because that's actually halacha. In Shulchan Aruch, there's somebody who is hired by the hour, who finishes in that day. You have the best time to pay them is till either sunset or sunrise if they work at night, etc. So there are many, many different ways of paying people and of stealing from people and not paying them. The 2 most famous, of course, are a ganaf and a gazlan. We just have to define our terms. Look in number 5. Kol hagonev mammon, says the Rambam, anyone who steals money, mishave pruta. Shave pruta is a very minimal amount. Let's say it's maybe worth about 5p, something like that, maybe a bit less. Umala oiva aloy stasashinemar aloy signov. So if you steal a certain amount, you are breaking the Torah law, okay? But not just that. Says the Rambam, osa lignov kol shehu din Torah. Liability in court is only over a pruta, a small amount. But the tiniest amount, a kol shehu, even a tiny fraction of a penny is actually still a Torah prohibition. So if you take the towels from the hotel when you go stay in the hotel, that's probably one of the worst kinds of theft you can do because you're stealing from all the shareholders of Marriott hotels or whatever the hotel chain you're in. So taking the towels could be stealing a very tiny amount from hundreds and thousands of people. That's not what you want to do. Geneva, we'll see soon, is stealing in a private way. Says the Rambam, Eizehu ganav. What is a ganav? Ze alokeach mamon adam beseta. That's someone who takes people's money sneakily. Ve'ena baalim yodim, and the owners don't know that you're taking it. Aval im lakach begaloi, but if you take the money forcefully in the open, farhesia, publicly, b'chozegad, with violence perhaps, Ain's a ganaf, that is not a ganaf, and a gazlan. That is a gazlan. Someone walked into a bank with a sawn-off shotgun. They're not a ganaf, they are a gazlan. Both ganaf and gazlan are prohibited, even in the smallest amount. The Shulchan Aruch says in number 6, this is all good introduction. Asa lignoiv afilu kol shehu dil Torah. You're not allowed to steal either as a ganaf or a gazlan, even the tiniest amount. Says the Shulchan Aruch, kol hagonev afilu shave pruta oiv alav v'lo yisignevu v'chai v'shalem. You have to pay back if you steal. Echad gonev mammon Yisrael. It doesn't matter whether you steal from Jews or gonev mammon shal goyim. It doesn't matter whether you steal from non-Jews. Echad gonev migadol. It doesn't matter whether you steal from grown-ups or mikatan or from children. Children have halachic ownership. There's a few points, maybe I'll stop the share for a second. There's an important couple of things coming out here. First of all, there is no distinction here between stealing from Jews, stealing from non-Jews. Now, that might be obvious. It's not entirely obvious because there are certain monetary obligations which apply between Jews and Jews. For example, you can't lend money and charge interest to a Jew, but you can lend money and charge interest to a non-Jew. Why is that? Because there's nothing immoral about lending money and charging interest. It's a perfectly reasonable business transaction. So why can't I do it for a Jew? The answer is because a Jew's family. That's the point. And if you don't feel the Jews are family, then the halacha is trying to get you to feel that. Meaning, if I at arm's length make a loan to somebody, a non-Jew, and charge them interest, that there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. I lend you my house, I charge you rent. I lend you my car, I charge you rental. So I lend you my money, I charge you interest. But if my mother rings me up and says, Anthony, can you lend me £5,000? And I say, Mum, I mean, what a question, you're my mother. Just pay me back 4% compound. Then that clearly is immoral. That's completely immoral. What's the difference? The difference is one's family. You can't charge interest to family. So you might have thought the same as with stealing. It's between Jews and Jews. No, stealing is a moral issue. It applies universally, says the Shulchan Aruch, between Jews and Jews, between Jews and non-Jews. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it even applies to children here, which is fascinating because confiscating children's property to discipline them is not so straightforward in halacha. Children may not transfer ownership until they're bar mitzvah, but they may take ownership. So if you give a toy to your child or grandchild, if you want to be halachically totally covered on all fronts, you need to make a clear condition when you give the toy and you say, I'm giving you this toy on condition that if you behave badly, I reserve the right to withdraw it on a temporary or permanent basis. You can see I used to be a lawyer. I don't think you have to draft a contract with your kids, but if you need to, then I'll be happy to help out. But the truth is, you can't just a teacher. You can't just necessarily confiscate unless you say that a kid goes into school on an implied condition that that's part of the school rules. And okay, I'm not getting into that now, but it's just something worth thinking about. What is worse, being a gazlan or being a ganaf? Stealing openly or stealing secretly? Here the Meforshim, and I brought you a note on the on the sheet here. The commentators are very clear that it's worse to be a ganaf. It's worse to do it in private, because at least a gazlan, at least a public, someone who steals in public, is not a hypocrite. They don't care what anybody thinks. They don't care what people think. They don't care what God thinks. They just do what they do. Whereas a ganaf adds to the theft a sneaky, what you might call bein adam la'atzmo, meaning there's something corrupted within their own self-image, that they live this lie of pretending that they're honest and fair, but actually cheating. There's no question that it's worse to be a ganaf. And of course, stealing on the internet is not gezela, it's not open and public, it's geneva, it's private in your front room. So we really need to try and get this right if you possibly can. Okay, good. So that's your kind of 3-minute primer of the laws of Geneva. We need to then ask, what is the implication for intellectual property? Because again, no one ever heard of intellectual property directly until the last couple of 100 years. So how does halacha deal with this? So the real issue here, and this is perhaps the most important line of the whole share, the real brain teaser here is the following. Theft halachically has to be something on a physical object, or at least that's what we think at the beginning. Look at the Rambam in number 8. Hagoinev b'reshus habalim. And let's say somebody breaks into someone's house, okay? And they're a burglar, and they steal from the house. At what point do they become a burglar? That's an interesting question. Like, say someone breaks into the house and the police catch them before they stole anything. Okay, so they're obviously a criminal, breaking and entering, but did they steal anything yet? No, I was just standing in the house. I didn't steal anything yet. Says the Rambam the following, if you break into someone's house to steal, If the stolen property is still in the ownership of the people who own the house, you didn't do anything yet to pick up the property. Potem and kefil, you are exempted from the double payment. I'm sure you know that the Torah says if you catch a gazlan or a ganaf actually, red-handed, if you catch them with the property, okay, and they admit to it, they have to pay double. So if they don't admit to it, but you find them guilty, they have to pay double. So at what point do they become an actual ganaf? So it says the Rambam, im higvia hagneva. Once they pick something up, they're in the house, they pick up the jewelry to steal, at that point you're a ganaf. Nitchayev, there you are obligated. Why? Mishum goinev, you're a ganaf. Afal pisha adayin lo hitzim rishus habanim. You didn't bring it out of the house here. That's irrelevant. But you need to make a kinyan geneva. Kinyan geneva or kinyan gezela. What is a kinyan? We're familiar with this in other areas of life. In order to make a proper halachic transfer of rights or ownership or obligations, there almost always has to be some kind of kinyan, official act of transferal. You see this at the wedding where the rabbi gives the chatan a pen, says lifts up the pen, because the rabbi is acting on behalf of the bride, and he says, I give you this pen, you give me all the obligations you owe to the bride, etc. Some kind of kinyan. So if I go to the shops and I buy something, when I lift it up and pay the money and lift it up afterwards, so then I'm doing a kinyan. So too, a ganaf who breaks into a house, when he lifts the stuff up to take it out, that's the moment he becomes a ganaf. So I'm sure you see already that when you're on the internet, how can you be a ganaf on the internet? You never lift anything. There's nothing physical going on. It's just millions and billions of electronic impulses going around, and you click. Since when can a click make you a ganaf? Can it or can't it? That's going to be the problem that engages us for the next 40 minutes, to try and work out how we're going to deal with that. Because the Meforshim classically say, number 9, this sets the theme, Masa Gezela, an act of theft, shaykh rak b'davar sheyesh b'mamash, can only be with a physical thing, then you can talk about a kinyan. So what are we going to do? So I'm going to show you 7 or 8 ways that the halacha deals with maybe carving out an idea of halachic theft without a physical kinyan. We'll see how that now, this is not a new issue. But before, maybe we'll just talk a little bit about the fact that there's no such thing as victimless theft. You're going to say, well, nobody really cares. You know, it's just so tiny, it doesn't really make any difference. So there are a number of sources on this. I'm not going to deal with number 10 now in order to save a bit of time, but I want to show you number 11, which is, I think, a very beautiful source. In Gemara in Eruvin, there's Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania says the following: no one's ever got the better of me, says this rabbi, apart from 3 occasions: a woman, a little boy, and a little girl. They each caught me out on different occasions. So what's the case of the little girl? Tinoket Mahi, says the Gemara. What's the case of the little girl? Says the rabbi this: she caught me out. She was right and I was wrong. Pam achat haiti mahalech b'derech. I was once walking down a path. The path went through a private field. And I was walking on the path through the field. Amrali tinoket. The little girl said to me, tinoket achat. The girl started shouting out, Rabbi. She shouted, Rabbi, lo sadeh. You don't realize you're walking through a field? You call yourself a rabbi walking through a field. Amartila, so the rabbi said, I said to her, what are you talking about? This must have been an Israeli child, I think, okay, to have said this, okay? The rabbi said, lo, derech fushahi. I'm walking on a road. There's a road, there's a path here. To which she answered, Amrali, she said to me, Listim kamoischa kavshua. It's thieves like you who made a path across the field. Meaning, there is no path. There's only a path because people keep walking across the field. That's why there's a path. So don't think just because everybody does a tiny little bit, then no one cares. No, in the end, we've got people walking across my field or my parents' field, etc. And therefore, we have to really think about whether these little things can add up to something potentially bigger. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is hopefully about 7 or 8 ways. I'll give you some fascinating historical precedents as to how this worked, as to how intellectual property has been enforced in halacha, and we'll see how this relates to internet issues as we go through. So let's have a look at the first example. Let's go back 400 years, 450 years. Now, before printing, there was really no issue of intellectual property. Nobody was really inventing anything, and nobody was publishing anything. But as soon as people started writing books, this issue became a real question. And there was quite a well-known cause celebre in the 1550s, famous rabbi called the Maram Padua, brought out a new copy of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. The Yad Chazakah, his Halachic work, a new print. The book was already 400 years old, but printing had just really been invented in the last 70, 80 years. So they brought out a new copy of the Mishneh Torah. They invested time, energy, etc., money, but almost immediately a non-Jewish publisher printed another edition of the same work and priced it much lower to obviously encourage everyone to buy his version rather than the other one, and piggybacked on a lot of the work that the other guy had done. So the Maram asked the Ramah, what can I do about this? Meaning, he's not stealing my books. He's just printing his own books and stealing my market. What can I do? So at that stage, the Ramah comes along, the Ramah, who is one of the co-authors of the Shulchan Aruch, and says, this is what we need to do. We need to put a cherem, an excommunication, on people who don't buy the right kind of books. Now, this is a bit of a blunt weapon in the sense that we're not really dealing with the gazela or the theft issue. We're just basically putting social pressure on people to buy books from the legitimate publishers. And I'm not going to read through the entirety of number 12, but he basically, let's read a few lines of it. The Ramah writes to him in the 1500s from Poland. This case that we have here, Zacha Badinoi, you are correct in your claim. Limkotlo Shuka Beresha, you got the market first. Limkor Sfarav Rishoni, you can sell your books first. Shaloi Yikne Shum Adam Sefer Maimoni Hanidfasim Michadash Mikarov Bao Ki Im Ayotzi Mitachat Yad HaGaon Niskarleo. Oh, the only people who should be buying books, they should only be buying books from you. Or boy koicho, from your people who come in after you, your dependents and descendants, etc. People who have your rights. And then he goes through a whole rabbinic language of basically cursing anyone who buys books from this non-Jewish market breaker, okay, who was undercutting the Maram Padua's book. And he says basically anyone who buys your book will be blessed, and anyone who buys his book. And he put a limit of 25 years. 25 years, it became common to put a limit of 25 years after this. I'm not sure that the Ramah himself put 25 years on, but afterwards that became the standard to allow you to actually establish your market, sell your books, and after 25 years, it's an open playing field. Now, this actually was one of the origins, you should know, of the haskama in the front of a book. It's very common now that people have a rabbinic letter of approbation, I think that's the word, before you buy the book, because nowadays people want to see if some rabbis actually read it and recommends it, and therefore they print these letters in the front. By the way, you should read the letters. I don't know if we talked about this once, but you should read what the letters say in the front of the book. They often don't say that they read the book. You should just know. They often say things like, I actually don't read English, but I gave it to my cousin who lent it to his brother who showed it to his friend, and he read this book and he said it looks like a thoroughly nice book. So read what they say. Sometimes people print books with a letter from a rabbi where the rabbi actually died 40 years ago. And all they're doing is the letter was for the author's first book, and this is you just have to read what it says there, and there are all sorts of stories like that. But the original reason for writing those letters was not only to say that this author is a jolly good fellow and you should buy his book, but it was to give this cherem. Not only should you buy this book, but you may not buy the competitor books. And this was really very widespread over the next 400 or 500 years to try and establish a market and make sure that the people who put the effort in, they got the market that they deserve. So that's the first way that they dealt with it, this idea of the cherem, and this became very, very popular. By the way, cherem, today, excommunication, is next to useless because it only worked when people were in communities where the cherem actually meant anything. Meaning, if you were part of a community and it was a close-knit community, back in the day when, the Jews of Minsk lived in Minsk, and those in Pinsk lived in Pinsk, and those in Vinsk lived in Vinsk, and never the twain shall meet. People didn't go from one to the other. So if you live in Minsk and the Rav of Minsk puts a cherem on you, then you're finished. You can't do business, you can't talk to people, you can't count for a minyan. Nowadays, people don't care. Someone puts them in cherem, they go down the road. They'll daven with in the shtibel down the road. They don't care. If they give them a nice donation, make a kiddush, they'll be fine with it. So the cherem doesn't really work anymore. But back in the days when communities were more closed, cherem was an effective weapon, and that was the first way of dealing with it. That's number one. Number two, hasagat gvul. This begins to carry also more into the modern era too. What's hasagat gvul? Changing a boundary. A couple of psukim. There are one mitzvah in the Torah which is repeated twice. Number 13. Loi tasig gvul re'echa. Do not move the boundary fence of your friend, asher gavlu rishonim b'nachal, which the earlier generations placed in your land. Asher tilcha ba'aretz, which you've inherited in the land, etc., etc. This obviously is property theft. You can't do a kinyan by lifting up property. One of the ways that you would steal property is by creeping out in the middle of the night and moving the boundary fence, a foot this way, 2 feet that way, and that's the way you'd steal land. You can't do that. This is repeated, which is interesting because that might mean that there's another form of hasagat gvul, which is repeated in the blessings and the curses in Dvarim. Arur masig gvul re'ehu. Cursed is the one who moves the boundary fence of his friend. And the rabbis established that this idea of hasagat gvul is not just a physical boundary, but also an economic boundary. And we'll see here in the Gemara in Bava Basra how this works. Look with me, number 15. Says the Gemara as follows. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Hi bar mavoa, someone who lives in a small street. A mavoa is like a cul-de-sac. And they make a little grinding business. They're grinding flour. Okay, they're a little bakery grinding flour. The asa bar mavoa chavrei, and his fellow dweller in the little street, someone around the corner or down the road, makes a competitive business in a small area. We're not talking about a big town like London where you could open 15 bakeries in Hendon and there's enough people to buy bread forever. Okay, we're talking about a little street. What can you do? Says the Gemara, end of the first line. Dinahu, the halacha is the ma'achev. He can stop them. He can take action and stop the second guy from opening up. Why? Because he can say to him, you're taking away my livelihood. Now again, the second guy is not stealing anything belonging from the first guy. He's not going and taking his equipment. He's taking his market, which is a free market. People can go wherever they like, but he can stop him from coming in. Lema Messiah, maybe this is an assistance to another case. This helps us with another case. Marchikin mitzudas hadag min hadag, kamali rita sadag. In the case of fishermen, says the Gemara, you can tell one fisherman to move down the river. We'll see what that is in a little bit. You can tell him to move down the river, a similar kind of situation. Except the Gemara goes on to say that there's one area that you cannot stop competition, and that's when it comes to Talmud Torah. If a rabbi starts teaching and another teacher opens up 2 doors down the road, there's no shortage of rabbis who want to teach, and there's no limited market, because the more people that are teaching, the more competition there'll be, and the better they will be at each other. So you can't shut down a school. If somebody wants to open a new Jewish school, another school can't turn around and say, I'm sorry, you're taking our kids away. That's not how it works. But with other businesses, potentially they can. What is the case of the fish? Look at the case of the fish, because we'll see soon how this is feeding into what we're talking about. Number 16. Rabbeinu Tam's father, who was Rashi's son-in-law, said the following. We're talking about dead fish. Look at the case here. Dead fish. It was the custom of fishermen to put dead fish into their nets. And of course, the other live fish come in to start seeing, oh, food, there's food here. Let's go and see what's going on here. And all the other fish come into that net. Since the first guy put his net down first, and through his actions, this action that he took, mit asvim shamsaviv, all the fish are there. Vada explains to us, im haya chaberu porish, if his friend would put a net down next door, have a keilu gozel. Very interesting expression. Have a keilu gozel. It's as if he's stealing. And you can say to him, you can go do that somewhere else. Now again, what does it mean? It's as if he's stealing. Obviously, he's not stealing the fish. Who do the fish in the river belong to before someone catches them? The answer is nobody. They are hefker. They belong to any.
Cool. Rabbi Manning? Okay, I think Rabbi Manning
maybe trying to come back in.
Yeah, Rabbi Manning will be back in a second. I was getting into the fish case. Yeah, I see Rabbi Manning will be back in a second. Meanwhile, it's a chance to pause and reflect and ponder.
I've already got 2 questions.
So did you say you're into the fish case or fish cakes?
Because I've just been eating fish cakes.
Were they hefker?
Well, they weren't hefker very long.
Well, I'm interested actually, related to this is the supermarkets who are selling kosher meat. Are they taking business away from the butchers? Well, probably not, because the butchers are supplying the meat in the first place.
Here we go.
Doesn't the same concept apply?
Okay, I'm back with you again. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know what happened there. We had a little Zoom glitch. I heard you talking about fish cakes. That sounded nice. And then someone started talking about kosher meat. What was that question around the kosher meat?
It was just the point that you can now buy kosher meat in many supermarkets. So are you taking business away from the butchers? Well, the retail part of the butchers anyway.
That's a good question. Not in a large market like, let's say, Northwest London, but let's say you lived, in, I don't know, Cardiff or somewhere like that, and there was a butcher shop, and then somebody else, a non-Jewish store opened up, undercutting the kosher butcher and selling kosher meat at much less of a price. So then there might be, obviously, the Sainsbury's is not going to be interested in going to Bayston. They couldn't care less about the Bayston, but there would be a case there, I think, for saying that Jewish people should be shopping at the kosher butcher, because it's in the interest of the Jewish community to have a kosher meat supplier who is Jewish, okay? Because Sainsbury's can turn around tomorrow morning and say, we've decided to not carry our kosher brand anymore because, we've just changed our buying policies. And then the community is completely up the creek, if you like. But a large community like London, so on the contrary, I think that the supermarkets actually introduce an element of competition to the kosher butchers to encourage them to lower their prices. But there again, I think that's a slightly different question, but it's related. So what's with the fish? The fish work like this. It's not stealing the fish. It's stealing the guy's investment of infrastructure. It's ki'ilu. It's not really stealing, but it's as if. And this was quite a famous case which was applied by the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer, who was one of the key rabbis in the early 1800s, this involved the Rodelheim Siddur. If anyone's ever davened in a Yekish shul, you'll know that the German shuls, they're very into their Rodelheim Siddur. It's full of all sorts of exciting things that German people get, or German-minded people get very excited about, like extra wording to say on Yom Kippur when all the rest of the wordings run out and that kind of thing. But the original Siddur, which was produced in the 1800s by a fellow called Wolf Heidenheim, he put enormous amounts of effort and investment into putting together this Siddur. And then basically somebody else wanted to undercut him, piggyback on all of this. And the Khatam Sofer used this case of the fish and said, you may not undercut someone's market once they've put that effort, etc. in. And he invoked that statement. Actually, it's very interestingly, he said he invoked the idea of the fact that we do allow competition within Talmud Torah, with teaching Torah, because he said what that means is not that we always have a free market, is that we have whichever market we need to maximize learning Torah, which he said in this case he felt needed to have a more interventionist market. Other people disagreed, by the way, and said, no, we have to leave it to the free market to do this. But the Chasam Sofer felt, no, you needed to protect the guy's investment, and therefore the Cherem angle was very much played there, and also this idea that he's, if you like, stealing the other guy's investment, like the fish case. That's another example. A third example is Hezek, and now we get into the more relevant internet questions of today. There is a mitzvah in the Torah not to cause, part of Gezela is not to cause loss, not to cause someone loss. The Shulchan Aruch raises a question from the Gemara, actually he's obviously quoting the Gemara, a case of the following situation. What if somebody is squatting in another person's property? Are they obligated to pay rent or not? So the Gemara goes through a number of scenarios. They say if the property is usually out for rental and therefore you're causing loss to the person by he can't now get tenants in because you're squatting, then obviously you're obligated fully to pay rent. Okay? What, however, is the case if the guy was never going to rent this property out? It's just lies empty. He couldn't care less. But you happen to be there, and now you're getting some free lodging, and it's not costing him anything. Can he make you pay for it? If you're gaining, ze nene v'ze lo chaser. This is an interesting halachic scenario. If somebody else is benefiting, but you're not losing out, can you say, I'm sorry, I'm not letting you benefit? You have to pay for this. Imagine you're reading somebody's newspaper over the neck. Someone's sitting on the train reading the newspaper, okay? And somebody else is looking down their shoulder reading behind them. Can the person turn around and say, hey, buddy, you buy your own newspaper. You can't read my newspaper. It costs money to buy a newspaper. Or is that just mean? What are they doing? They're not wearing out the print. They're just reading from behind you. What's your problem? So generally speaking, we say that if you're not losing out, but they're benefiting, so then why would you stop them? You can't stop them because that's just mean. But the second, the Shulchan Aruch says, the second that they cause you any loss, in the case of the squatter, the minute that the squatter makes the walls a little bit dirty or makes the place look a little bit scruffy, that's it. He's liable for complete rent. Why? Because the general principle is once you cause somebody any loss at all, willingly and knowingly, then that's a full case of theft. And therefore, one of the main questions for copyright and photocopying and things like that is going to be, are you causing loss to the person, yes or no? And this is an interesting point, which is, it depends on the scenario. Let's say I want to photocopy a page out of an art scroll siddur to use in a class that I'm teaching. I just want to copy one page. I have 40 people in the class. So I'm never going to go and buy 40 art scroll siddurs. I'm never going to do that. Because if I have to do that, I'll teach something else. So art scroll are not losing any money on me because I'm never going to buy that. On the other hand, if I ask art scroll, are you okay with me photocopying the sheet? They'll say, no, you have to buy the siddur. So am I allowed to copy the sheet, yes or no? So if you go by the criteria of loss, so the answer is yes. What loss did I cause them? I didn't cause them any loss. If I would have bought the book, then I have to buy the book. But if I would never have bought the book, then I don't have to buy the book. Here in this particular case, there was a case of the Noda B'Yehuda where somebody printed a new Gemara, and then the publisher used the blocks for the print of the Gemara. He printed a Gemara with a commentary. So the publisher printed it, very nice. But then he said, you know something, nobody really wants this commentary anyway. Let's just reprint the Gemara. He's got the blocks now anyway. And he printed it without a commentary, and everyone's now buying this cheaper Gemara that didn't have the commentary in. So the guy turned around and says, hey, you can't do that. You're causing me loss. I'm now losing money because you've acted in this way. And the Noda B'Yehuda said, correct. You are causing this guy actual loss in his market. You're not physically stealing his things. But once you're causing somebody loss through your actions, so that's also a relevant factor. Sometimes they will be, sometimes they won't be. What about on the internet? If you download somebody's music illegally, are you causing them loss? Often yes. Sometimes no, but often yes. Certainly you may be causing a minute amount of loss, but if you do it, another person does it, and a million people do it, then all of a sudden there's massive loss to the music industry, etc. So the rabbi walking across the field, he didn't really cause any damage directly, but he's just walking across a field that thousands of other people have walked across, and the net effect of that is to cause massive loss. So some people have raised this question of loss as being a helpful way forward. Another way forward is the issue of contractual rights. And Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg talks about this and says, Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva here, number 18. He says, if a rabbi makes a tape, back in his day it was tapes, and says to people, you may buy my tape, but you may not copy my tape, does that work? And Rav Moshe says, yes, it does work. Because if I sell you something, I can make the terms on which I sell it to you. So I can sell you the physical tape. Yes, I now own the physical tape, but I never bought the right to copy that tape. I only bought the right to listen to that tape. So Rav Moshe says, if you carve out of the contract, if you like, the right to do X, Y, and Z, so then it's definitely theft. That's definitely theft, because then you're using the property without the permission of the person who sold it to you. How far does this go? What if I buy a car from somebody and they say to me, you can buy this car, but excuse me, forgive me, but I've got a thing about driving cars on Sunday. I'm a religious Christian. You may not drive the car on a Sunday, but you can buy it from me on condition that you don't drive the car on a Sunday. And if you drive the car on a Sunday, I will consider that a theft of my car. Does that work in halacha? It might do. Meaning you buy it, you sign on the condition. If you break the condition, then you're a thief. So if you look at ArtScroll, here I'll share my screen with you again. Sorry about the glitch before. My camera just suddenly decided it didn't like talking to my computer. You know, maybe they've got something going on behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. Okay. If you look here in the ArtScroll wording, I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can even see it. Whenever you buy an ArtScroll book, it says the following. I hope that ArtScroll don't mind me copying their do not copy wording, but I'm not copying ArtScroll, just their wording. It says, you can't copy this for anything, not for personal use, not to teach Torah, not to do anything. And by the way, if you call up ArtScroll and ask them if they mind, they will usually say yes. Once I must tell you, I called them up and asked them, I was making a siyum for my grandfather's yahrzeit, and I asked them if they minded me copying a little Mishnah thing, and they said yes. That was very nice of them. But usually they say no. Fine. So so that's your answer. Why can't I copy the ArtScroll book? Because I contracted with ArtScroll that I wouldn't do that. But there's a problem, because I didn't buy the book from ArtScroll. I bought the book from Torah Treasures on Brent Street, and he bought the book from a wholesaler, and they bought the book from ArtScroll. So I never entered into a contract with ArtScroll at all. So the problem with this route is it just might not work contractually, because I never promised anything to anybody when I bought this book, and certainly not to ArtScroll. And therefore many Rabbonim will say, often you do. For example, when you sign on to YouTube, if you get your YouTube app or whatever, you know when you click and it brings up the terms and conditions and say, do you agree or do you not agree? So who here ever reads the things that you agree to? You don't read them. Why would you read them? Meaning it's called Hobson's choice. You either click I agree or you don't buy it or you don't take it. You can't negotiate. But if you look carefully at all the things you're agreeing to, so then there are lots of contractual conditions. And on YouTube, for example, you promise that you won't download their stuff. And therefore, if you do, clearly that's theft. You agreed with YouTube. You clicked I agree. That is a contract. And therefore, in this particular situation, clearly you'll be a thief. But in the ArtScroll situation, less clear because I never contracted, as I said, with ArtScroll. So that's another possibility. The last two, however, actually, I think are the most important. About 150 years ago, came along someone called the Shoel Umeshev, Rav Yosef Nathanson of Lemberg. And he came along with the following. He said like this: the non-Jewish world have invented the laws of copyright. They didn't have that before, but now they do. He brings an example. He says some guy invented a cheshbon machine, some calculating machine, and the Polish government gave him gave him a patent on it, and now everyone has to pay him. Says the non-Jews have become sensitized to this idea of copyright. Said if the non-Jews have it, we must have the same idea. It has to be. There can't be something, he says, and this is based on a classic Talmudic idea, there can't be something which for the non-Jewish people is prohibited, but for us we say, oh, we're fine with that. That's not theft for us. If it's theft for them, it has to be theft for us. Philosophically, it has to be theft for us because of this principle. There's a similar idea, by the way, with abortion. It's clear in halacha that it is abortion, it is prohibited we've talked a little bit about this, for a non-Jew to commit an abortion. It's less clear that it's murder for a Jew to carry out an abortion. So come along certain authorities, Rav Moshe Feinstein, others, and said it has to be. If it's murder for a non-Jew, it has to be murder for a Jew, because there can't be something which they have which is prohibited, which we have which is permitted. So on this area, the Sholem Eshiv said it's got to be theft. And this is the position of a number of poskim. And it simply follows that line, that stealing intellectual property, downloading something which is prohibited will be halachic theft. And according to this, it doesn't make any difference, how long it's been. It doesn't make any difference whether you would have bought it or wouldn't have bought it. Meaning, if I steal an Art Scroll Siddur, I can't argue, well, I wouldn't have bought one anyway. It's irrelevant. Once it's theft, it's theft. You can't sell it on. You can't copy it. You can't fence it, etc. According to this position, it will be extremely strict. And basically, any kind of downloading from the internet will be theft, unless you take the view that people who put stuff on the internet basically accept that it's effectively hefka. It's effectively out there. Once you put something on the internet, you're open to all comers. If you take that view, which is not necessarily true, by the way, because people do take legal action against large downloading from the internet. They don't usually sue people like you and me because it's not worth their while, but they will take legal action when they can. Once you say that it's theft, then you've really restricted anything you can do. You really need to know your law very, very well. However, many people don't take that view. They say, no, you can't just invent a form of theft. Therefore, the most likely halachic category that it's going to fall into is what's called dina de malchusa dina. And we have to talk about this for 5 minutes or 3 minutes, so it's getting a bit late. But what's dina de malchusa dina? Dina de malchusa dina means basically that in financial areas, the law of the land is the law. So if the non-Jewish government of the land make laws for the financial regulation of the country, tax law, for example, the Shulchan Aruch says, if the non-Jewish authorities charge tax, the Jew has to pay tax to the government. And if the Jew doesn't pay tax, they are a gazler. They are stealing from the government because the tax is legitimate because of dina de malchusa dina. Literally, the law of the land is the law. Now, there's a debate as to how far this goes. If the law of the land said you're not allowed to do shechita, that would not apply. It doesn't affect ritual matters of just pure Jewish halacha between Jews and Jews, but it will affect anything that's financial, anything that's taxable, tax-related, and anything that's regulatory. So everybody agrees that the copyright legislation will fall into dina de malchusa dina, and therefore the position of many, many poskim is basically, the bottom line is that if you don't go with this idea that it's halachically theft, then you just need to check whether it's legal, what you're doing is legal in the jurisdiction that you're in. So basically there are 3 positions. One position is if you're causing loss to somebody financially, even if it's very small, then almost certainly that will be theft. Okay, you need to think about whether that is happening or not. And as I said, in the case of the Art Scroll copy of 1 page, then that's really not happening. There are poskim who are much stricter, rabbinic authorities who are much stricter and take the view, if it's theft for them, it has to be theft for us with all the ramifications for that. But I'd say that the most common approach is this one of dina de malchusa dina, which is you've got to ask yourself the following question. Is what I'm about to do legal according to non-Jewish law? If it isn't, then almost certainly halachically it's theft. If it is, then almost certainly it's fine. The problem is, how do you know? And which system of laws are you even under? I'm sitting here in England downloading something which is, uploaded in Canada, routing through a server which is in Shanghai, which set of laws are you even following? If you ask intellectual property lawyers, it's not clear at all. So you're trying to work out which laws am I trying to work out if I'm breaking or not breaking. That is not itself straightforward at all. But again, as I said, if you know that what you're doing is illegal, then it's definitely prohibited in halacha. If it's not illegal, then, for example, fair use. There is and I'll open up to some questions in a minute, there is a fair use principle in a lot of intellectual property law, which means even if the guy who created this or published this or uploaded this insists that you can't copy it, the law says that you are allowed to copy it if the use is fair. And there's no clear definition of that. It depends on how much you're downloading, what you're using it for, whether you're making money out of it, whether you're causing them loss. It's going to be a judgment call in every case. But once you fit into that category, then you're in solid legal territory, and probably then halachically also, you're fine. So I would say what I say to my students when they ask me, is this okay or is this not okay, is find out whether it's legal, and if it's not legal, then it's definitely not okay, and if it is legal, it's probably fine. But that's not very helpful because they usually can't find out whether it is legal or whether it isn't legal. Let me leave you with one last source, which is a very nice source, which is obvious, which is Rabbi Lichtenstein. This is after he died. So there was people were talking about aspects of his life. So let me just read you this last little source in number 24 here. It was no simple feat, but Michael Eisenberg finally mustered the courage to ask Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein a question on halacha. After months of failed attempts to do so, Mr. Eisenberg slowly and forcefully brought his legs one in front of the other, approached Rabbi Lichtenstein, seated at the front of the yeshiva at Har Etzion Beit Midrash study hall as a nervous student approaches his majestic king. Servant approaching the majestic king. The servant, sweating, trembling, waits to be recognized by the monarch. Once Mr. Eisenberg was acknowledged with a kind smile, he asked what the Rosh Yeshiva thought about copying music from one cassette to another. Rabbi Lichtenstein replied, "You bought it, you made a kinyan, so you reserve the right to do with it what you like." He paused, "But you will not win a medal for Kedoshim Tihiyu," meaning even if something is technically, halachically permitted, it does not mean that it's the right thing to do. And that's an important point to end on, and I'm happy to discuss a little bit, meaning there are catch-all halachas, kedoshim tiyu, v'asisa yasha v'atov, you have to do the right thing, that even when something is technically permitted, if it smells bad, it's probably not right. Yeah, and therefore, it's hard to know. It doesn't always smell bad. But, and sometimes it's legal, and everyone knows that you're playing the games. In Netflix, if you've got a VPN and you're able to get hold of British Netflix, even though you're living in Israel, even though Netflix don't like it, but it is technically legal, is that the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? Okay? So actually, if you sign a contract with Netflix, contractually, you promise them that you won't download Netflix from any other jurisdiction than the one that you're actually watching in. So actually, they've got you on the contracts. And therefore, you are definitely stealing from Netflix because you agreed that you wouldn't do that. So it's worthwhile checking what you signed up for sometimes. But okay, so let's just summarize, and then we'll talk questions. What is the key issue? The key issue is, how can I make a kinyan? How can I halachically steal something which is not physical? And the ways in which this was approached over the years are either a cherem, an excommunication was made on people who behaved badly and undermined markets, or hasagat gvul, moving people's financial, economic boundaries, or hezek, causing them loss to their business. That's a real issue. Or maybe there's just a general assumption that there is a halachic concept of theft because the non-Jews have intellectual property law, or maybe there was a contract that you made there, you signed up for something, in which case there'll definitely be theft, or maybe it's just dina de malchus dina, and all that you can do is check whether it's legal in the relevant property law or intellectual property law, and then you'll know what the halachic answer is. Okay, so I've said enough. I hope that's clear. I think the principles are clear, but the application is far from clear. Questions, thoughts?
I was trying to work out which of the words in the article Siddur they actually own.
Well, they printed the Siddur, they made the fonts, they organized it, they translated their own translation. Obviously, Tehillim is owned by David HaMelech, and he's never going to sue you
Well,
for
that's the point. Yeah.
No, but the point is that you're right. But once you take their fonts and their translation and their pagination, that's what they've put in. And there's no question, if I just photocopy hundreds of Art Scroll Sidurim and give them to my congregation, that's clearly theft on many, many different levels. That's clearly.
Right, but if you're using a page for educational purposes, you don't care about the fonts.
Right, I don't care about the fonts, and I'm quite confident. I mean, please ask your own lawyers. I'm quite confident taking one page out of an Art Scroll Siddur to teach a non-profit educational class in a room would definitely be fair use. I don't think any lawyer would disagree with that, and therefore I think that Art Scroll can scream blue murder and say you're not allowed. I'm not sure that they could ever enforce that, and therefore halachically, I'm not sure that's relevant. If you go with Dina de Malchus Sedina, if you go with the more strict understanding that it's theft, then it's theft, and then you wouldn't be allowed to do it.
Yeah, well, I don't believe they've suffered loss either, because nobody would, in their right mind, buy 25,000.
Relevant if it's theft. Meaning, if it's theft, it doesn't matter if you suffer loss or not. If I just borrow your mug and give it back to you tomorrow morning, that's also theft, even though you never needed it. So once you define it as theft, then all of the other stuff becomes almost irrelevant. Yes, a couple more questions. Mr. Weiss, you had a question?
Just a comment first. Fair use is one of the areas I get involved in. It's sort of copyright, and fair use is fairly clearly defined. In the sense, if you look into it, it's what it means. The question I had was something like, I've got two, but the first one is about relating to Sephariah, because there is so much material on there now. I know that their Gemara, with their commentary, they've been given permission to use it. Mm-hmm. But essentially, why buy the Art Scroll Gemara? Or for that matter, why buy the Koran Shas when you've got Sephariah that does pretty much everything and a lot more? So what's the copyright situation for something like that?
Well, clearly, Sephariah has bought the rights from the Koran Shas to use their translation. You're not doing anything wrong. One of the great imponderable questions of our time is why anybody would buy the Koran Shas, because it's so expensive, but it's a beautiful book. The answer is, I think, is because people want a book on the shelf. It's beautifully made. It looks nice. I'd buy it myself if it didn't cost about 35 quid per volume, and there were about 100 volumes.
I'll tell you how to get it cheaper if you want.
All right, fine. We can do the business later. But it's that some people want a book on the shelf. The Art Scroll, by the way, is a completely different book. And does a completely different thing. But I agree with you, but there's no copyright issue there, because everything that Sephariah has bought, they've bought with permission, or they've commissioned their own translators to use. By the way, their translations are not always amazing. Don't just take the Sephariah translation as being, the only, I was going to say as gospel, but that's probably not the right expression. But
they don't have that there.
I don't think they have that. But usually their stuff is pretty good. The source sheets, by the way, they have a very sort of mixed hodgepodge of people's source sheets. Some of them are very good. Some of them are completely nonsense. So you just have to be selective in the way, because anyone can upload their own material. So you can, just be aware that they've got amazing things on Sephariah, but some of them are not always as helpful as others. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for this course, because we found it very interesting.
My pleasure.
Two points. The first one is, if talking about the law of the land, if the law of the land in Israel is to go into the army,
yes,
it's breaking halacha if you don't send your children to the army in certain. Okay,
so that's a completely politically free question. But I'll give you the answer. The answer is, first of all, there is a debate. There's a three-part answer to that question. First of all, there's a debate as to whether the law of the land applies in Israel at all. Why? Because the rationale behind the law of the land is, you live in Poland. The King of Poland has very kindly agreed to let you live in his country if you pay his taxes. So you have to pay his taxes because he does you the great service of allowing you, out of the generosity of his own heart, to live in Poland or Britain or America or wherever. Now, in Israel, it's a little bit different, because no one can allow you or not allow you to live in Israel. You have the right as a Jew to live in Eretz Israel. It's given to you by the Torah. So you're not living there by the courtesy of the Israeli government. So there are those that want to argue that Dina B'Chus Dina applies in a different way in Israel. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there are plenty of halachic grounds for saying that you absolutely have to keep the law in Israel and pay your tax in Israel as well. And I'm very particular to advise people to do that. But Dina B'Chus maybe was a little bit different. Second level is that even if Dina B'Chus Dina works in Israel completely 100%, let's assume it does, I'm not sure it would apply in the same way to going to the army, because that's not really a financial issue. It may be that there are people who feel that there's a halachic prohibition. Let's say they're a girl going to the army, or they're a boy in a girl's unit or whatever, and therefore it may go beyond that. I must tell you that even from the most religious Zionist pro-army camps, I don't mean camps, but groups of people, there are those that will say that if a boy is drafted into a unit with girls, they should not go. And they are coming from the most Zionist, live on a hilltop in the middle of nowhere. But the third thing is, and this is the most important thing, is the Israeli government gives permission to large sectors of the population not to go into the army. And therefore, it can't possibly be wrong to not go in the army if the Israeli government has told you that it's okay to not go in the army. You may not agree with that law, in which case, great, we live in a democracy, you vote in the government, we'll change the law, etc. So I don't see how anyone can have a legal or halachic problem with people following the law, yeah, if that's what they're doing. So, I mean, my son went to the army, he would never have dreamed of not going to the army, and I actually feel it's extremely appropriate for people to go to the army, because everybody should be part of the national, the national team. But if the law is otherwise, then I can't fault people for keeping the law. Okay, yes, Mrs. Ansell.
Yeah. Although I have two questions, I'll limit it to one. Okay. First of all, yeah, this is brilliant stuff. Thank you. So I want to ask this question and understand whether it could even be considered as theft. So you buy your services, let's say, off a lawyer, right? And you have an agreement, it's so much per hour. And then as things, the whole case lasts a lot longer than you would have thought, and that they thought. And by the end of it, although the case has been won by the person, the actual fees are so high, and you had no idea they were that high. And I thought, as a lawyer yourself, you're probably, I'm not saying that you would be that lawyer, I'm sure you wouldn't be, but there are many commercial, lawyers out there. And I wondered, where you go with that one.
Right, well, I'm sure that, who on this chat is a lawyer? Let me ask you. Anyone? No lawyers? There are no Jewish lawyers living in Stanmore?
I've got a law degree, if that helps.
I mean, does it help? I don't know. Maybe it does.
It didn't help. The truth is, it didn't help at all.
I'm the only lawyer, ex or current, on this particular conversation. You might argue that all lawyers are guilty of theft just by being lawyers. I can see that argument running with some people. Let me let you in on a secret. When lawyers charge you by the hour, first of all, I'm sure that they've made you sign something at the beginning, which says that you're going to pay their hourly rates, and therefore you probably haven't got a leg to stand on, as long as they're being honest in their accounting of their hours. I can't speak for every law firm, but certainly when I was working as a lawyer, people were very particular to log every 5 minutes, etc. However, let me let you in on a professional secret. Lawyers don't really charge by the hour. They use the hourly rate as a guide to how much they think they can charge you. So let's say we did a job which took 150 hours, but the reality is it shouldn't have taken that. It should only have taken 30. Then the hourly rate is not going to be relevant. They're going to pay what they think you can get for the job. Now, it could be that it took that many hours and it really is that worth that much money, and it's like, that's the way it is. So, but it's a commercial. Nobody should ever pay their lawyers without having a negotiation. I mean, they should have a discussion about what's the job worth, because that's what they're really interested in, not the number of hours. They're interested in what's the job worth. And therefore, maybe I've just become Israeli in my old age, but don't let your lawyers off lightly.